So, is Nerona Imu, the king of the One Piece world, a parrot? At least that's what you've all been asking, that's what the entire internet has been debating the last few days, and quite frankly, I need to discuss it now because one, you guys have been asking for this over and over and over again in the comments, in my DMs, and even like a guy on the streets in Tokyo that has walked up to me and asked me to make a video about this, but also two, after finally digging into it, this is probably one of the coolest, most unique, and just hilarious theories that I've ever come across. It kind of actually explains so much about Imu's mannerisms, his relationship with Joy Boy and Davy Jones, and just the One Piece itself. So I'd like to go and break it down with you today, give it like the good old Manu treatment, right? And see what sticks, what icks, and what squawks, I guess. Section by section, point by point, until we can really answer the question, does Imu just want a cracker? Also, I of course want to give credit where it's due. I'm just kind of struggling honestly to source the exact spot that this originally came from. I do know that this one cracked into the TikTok sphere, somewhere I'm honestly not really present personally. I don't have TikTok, but I also saw it on Reddit, posted by a user called Arkisu, I think is how to pronounce that. But again, I don't know if that's where it actually started or not, so leave a nice comment if you actually do know somewhere that predates that, where this theory came from, so I can actually pin that comment. Thank you. Anyways, let's not really get into it and start with what I think is the single strongest piece of evidence behind this entire theory, which is Imu's silhouette. Now, here's the deal. This one specifically got me because it's like exactly the type of goofy thing that Oda would just love to do. We've seen Imu for so long in this very specific silhouette, starting with chapter 906 of course. Someone sitting on the empty throne wearing what looks like a massively goofy sized long crown and a long flowing cloak. And with this like habit-like headwear, it just oozes secret religious king of the world energy. And then obviously, we do know that Imu can actually transform his body, become this like super freaky devil lunarian thing after he agonizes in pain and spits up some blood. I'm personally still not entirely certain if demon mode is just Imu's real form or not, and this parrot theory at least, as you can tell, kind of suggests the opposite. The idea here would be that devil mode is just Imu's zone form, and that the parrot would be his base form. So, let's get after that. This is Nerona Imu. So I want you to really forget whatever you think you're looking at. Now I want you to imagine Parrot. Not a crown, but a big feather head like a cockatoo. The habit? Feathers. The giant shape that Imu has when he starts to attack Sabo, halfway into Gigabird mode basically. Honestly, once you're able to kind of see it, the silhouette starts looking a little bit bird-esque, not cloak-esque. Like, for example, when he's climbing up the stairs here, I can totally see the trail off as like tail feathers instead of this long, silky, smooth rope. I kind of started digging into it a little bit more actually, just to like see, and because I'm curious obviously, and I gotta say, yeah, like it's pretty clear. Maybe just take a look at different large tropical birds like macaws, cockatoos, and obviously parrots. Many of their outlines are genuinely just way too similar to Imu's. So I gotta admit, I kinda get why you wanted me to cover this theory now, because out of the gate, there is of course something here. Now, before I go address the big problem with the silhouette stuff, because there is a problem, there's also one more instance of an Imu silhouette and how it was positioned that many people are calling the smoking gun evidence of this theory. This panel from chapter 1181. This is the moment where Imu is acknowledging Joy Boy is accompanied by him in silhouette with the former sun god and first pirate, Mr. Joy Boy himself. Now, as you know, there have been tons of weird quirks with Joy Boy's silhouette over time. Art where it looks like he had a hook hand or a peg leg when Emmet remembered him. It kind of seems like Oda is saving some of the key pirate stereotypes like the peg leg, the eye patches, and obviously a parrot on your shoulder for someone. I actually personally thought for the longest time it would be Roxy Zebek, but we now know that that's just not true. So, is it Joy Boy that all of this stuff is being saved for? Will he get an eye patch and a parrot? And with all that in mind, look at the position of Imu during this little flashback from chapter 1181. At first, the image of course appears to show Imu in the distance, looking at Joy Boy who is in the foreground, but you know, what if no? What if no indeed? And instead what we're actually seeing here is a tiny parrot Imu on Joy Boy's arm/shoulder, talking to his former master. That's right, this theory isn't just about if Imu is a parrot, it's also that he was Joy Boy's parrot. Like, well, technically, some people are debating if he was Joy Boy or Davy Jones's parrot, I guess. But for this video, I kind of want to focus more on the Joy Boy side here because personally, that's just the way I see this theory panning out way better, which is a little bit difficult with just this one piece of evidence. I do also have to address now the big issue because there is way more evidence that backs this entire theory, but I kind of feel like it makes more sense to deal with the counterpoints throughout this video as we go along when they're applicable and not just like put them on at the end of this video. As you know, Oda is not exactly reliable with his silhouettes, right? He just isn't. He's never been. Kaido, Big Mom, dude, Loki, none of their silhouettes even remotely look anything close to their final designs. So to just assume that we can use Imu's silhouette as an accurate representation of his actual true form, it really has no grounding whatsoever in anything we've ever gotten from like Oda before for any other character like this. If anything, it's kind of more likely the opposite, and his demon form being so different has way more room to stand on actually. Well, traditionally speaking, of course. Something that I kind of need to remind myself now and then, and that actually helps the bird idea, is that Oda is getting better and better now with silhouettes as well. And Imu's been deliberately drawn multiple times this way, including after we already had his complete design apparently revealed anyways. And with the Warriors of the Holy Land, we were able to reasonably guess the Gorosei's true forms based on their throne room silhouettes, right? And the Holy Knight's projected silhouettes were mostly accurate actually, and if so, maybe this image floating around of giant parrot Imu filling that silhouette might be way more accurate than we are all prepared for. Also, this would have been a fantastic thumbnail, but you can see it here. Really cool. But it's not just Imu himself, of course. There is something more here that ties into the visual language of Parrot King Mu that I obviously have to talk about as well. Like, take for example, the flower room. Whenever we see Imu inside his beautiful little garden, not to be confused with Little Garden of course, the room atop Pangaea Castle is actually framed by tall, narrow, vertical panes and panels that stretch very high upward. Something that people have pointed out definitely does somewhat resemble the bars of a massive birdcage. Guess maybe there's another connection between Mr. Doflamingo and Imu after all, so birdcage foreshadowing by Oda? Maybe? And I mean, this does line up as well with what we know about Imu. Imu does walk freely inside the garden, surrounded by butterflies, flowers, and just a lot of open space, but he's also always seemed to be kept in that room, right? By something, or else why not make a move all the time? Why would the Gorosei be so concerned about him leaving? In a sense, it feels like Imu is partially a bird whose wings are clipped, metaphorically speaking, of course, not actually. We've seen him fly around Elbaph too much to say that they're literally clipped, obviously. But whether it's a time limit thing, or his body maybe can't handle the Surfeit world for too long, or he's just in some way linked to that location, it's very clear that something has the old man spooked and Imu tethered to his flower room. But turns out there's also just some more direct visual bird things that I want to get into as well. See this here, the hoof of the soaring dragon, the famous mark used by the CDs on their slaves. But canonically speaking, this symbol represents a dragon hoof. However, some Parrot viewers will very clearly see that the shape also resembles the talon of a bird. Whoa! Crazy, right? Admittedly, I kind of hoped that this point would turn out to be a little bit stronger looking into it, but after digging a little bit more, I kind of felt like it was a little bit weak, honestly, since you see, it turns out that parrots have zygodactyl feet, which, in case you somehow don't know what that means, which means that you have 2 toes pointing forward and 2 toes pointing backward, producing a very distinctive claw-like or cross-shaped grip thing here. Now, the celestial dragon hoof, on the other hand, is, say it with me, anisodactylis. 3 up, 1 back, and so I would say that the hoof of the dragon is safe from the evidence locker, at least for now. But what isn't safe is the world government logo itself. 4 balls at the end of a cross. And you know what that looks like? This thing here. This big bird toy that you can buy at pretty much any pet store. Now, I think it's a piece of evidence for sure, but how strong? I don't really know. Like, there is something distinctly Oda smelly about this, though. Like, the idea that the world government logo is just Imu's favorite toy. Absolutely hilarious, don't get me wrong. Okay, sure, but like, there's a little bit of a silly point. You want an absolutely insane mythological tie-in that deals with a giant parrot demon thing becoming a false sun and moon god? That's what I thought you would want. Considering how often Oda borrows from real-world mythology, and I know I don't talk about this often on my channel, but Oda likes mythology, guys. It would be absolutely crazy not to assume that Imu is directly tied to one as well. And for today, the character that we want to talk about is Vucub Caquix, I think is how you pronounce that, but I'm only 40% certain. He's a major character from the Mayan Popol Vuh. Popol Vuh? Here's the deal. Big Vucub is a gigantic, brilliantly colored bird who declares himself to be the sun and the moon. He elevates himself above everyone else, believing that he deserves to rule the entire world simply because of his own beauty and power. In reality, though, turns out he's actually a false god. His authority is built on arrogance and illusion rather than truth, and eventually he's confronted and defeated by the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who, get this, shot him out of a fruit tree out of all things. Interesting. And they did so by shooting out his special eyes that gave him crazy powers. Now that's something. The idea that Imu is a mythical parrot and there is a parrot demon who rose to power over the sun and moon gods who is tied to a fruit tree with special eyes? Yeah, I can absolutely see the parallels to Imu, to say the least. And it kind of sets an interesting precedent for a lot of other stuff we've spoken about before, which is that I believe that Luffy and Blackbeard, figures who I think might actually be tied to the sun and the moon metaphorically, will actually have to work together in order to defeat Imu at some point before they can then squirrel about the One Piece. To do this, they might just drop some crazy sun and moon liberation powers on him, thus exposing him to the world and defeating him, just like the hero twins in the Mayan myth. Not to mention that in the Popol Vuh, the two twins then truly become the sun and the moon gods after slaying this massive Macaw. I also just wanted to quickly point out, because this theory predated chapter 1189, that there is actually also a very weird comment from Imu about brothers specifically that I kind of glossed over, that I feel like would feel extra special if Imu does turn out to be a giant bird demon. Like, Imu randomly choosing to call out Sabo and Ace just like truly out of the blue was very confusing to me. I'm not sure if you felt the same way, but if it does tie into Joy Boy, or maybe even Nika, then that would be absolutely rad. I can totally see a world where Imu was this like uber massive demon bird who was stripped of his power by Nika and then maybe his brother. So then Imu became just a regular parrot during the Void Century, returning to power after defeating Joy Boy. And like, come on, man. Wouldn't a giant bird demon with Imu's eyes be absolutely terrifying and also kind of awesome? I'll dig into the eye stuff a little bit more later, as there is actually another point of evidence here I thought of that I haven't personally seen floating around anywhere all too much. But for now, let's actually shift into one of my favorite pieces that people talk about in this theory, and best piece of evidence so far, and what I believe is the true foundational one, which is the wordplay behind it. You see, ironically, when you actually move past the physical evidence that most people are fixated on, the theory actually shifts into something way stronger in my personal opinion: lore, mythology, and most importantly, Oda's crazy obsession and love for playing with names and layering meanings. Laugh Tale being hidden behind the Raftel translation, Nika being the sound effect for laughter, Zaza being the sound effect for rain, Luffy's iconic number being 56 because it's pronounced Gomu like the Gomu Gomu no Mi. It really goes for pretty much anything in the series, and as you might remember from some of my original older theory videos, like in Japan and in like the Japanese theory community, it's like pretty much part of anything that people talk about here. Chapter titles, attack names, you name it, Oda's probably made some funny, clever word joke regarding it all. And because Oda has established that pattern over the last 25 plus years, it is only natural to pay attention whenever an important character's name can be interpreted in more than one way. And so it begs the question, when it comes to parrot theory, is there a word pun, a goro awase as it's called in Japanese, or something else hidden here that we can work with? Oh yeah. Turns out there absolutely is. Something that could actually only work for Imu specifically. Now, the first observation here revolves around the Japanese word omu, which means, yep, you guessed it, parrot. Now, of course, as you can tell, there's a letter wrong here. Well, technically, if you actually look into the Japanese, there's 2 letters wrong, because in Japanese, these like long stretched sounds like o, in this case, it's like o-u, so it's o-mu, compared to imu, so it's actually 2 letters wrong. On its own, it wasn't really super convincing to me. Trust me, as someone who has done it, since Japanese is full of words that, happen to sound alike. It's very easy to build a theory around coincidence if you're looking hard enough, but it doesn't work that well in, Japanese itself. But it's not about omu and imu, it's about o and mu and imu. What do I mean by that, though? Well, something that is pointed out in the theory specifically is that you can split omu into o and mu. And thanks to the very specific way the Japanese language works, something beautiful happens, because the first half, o, is one of the Japanese words associated with a king or a ruler. Like Mao, you know this word probably from anime, the demon king, o is the king. And giving Imu's role being the secret sovereign sitting atop the empty throne and ruling the world, this new version of omu immediately stands out really hard, since the second half, mu, is of course exactly the name that Imu calls himself. So slam them together and you've got O-mu, or King Mu, which is now Omu, aka Parrot, and Parrot can be broken down and read as King Mu. Now that's pretty interesting, I think. That interpretation actually opens up another rabbit hole entirely also. Again, none of this proves anything, I think, but it's still interesting and fun. It's simply another layer that exists beneath the surface of the name, and a layer that Oda usually loves to play with. But what's really interesting is that these 2 interpretations don't actually compete with each other whatsoever. If Oda intentionally chose the name Imu, it's entirely possible he wanted readers to eventually notice more than one meaning here. The sound of omu can evoke the image of a parrot, while o and mu reinforces Imu's standing and status as the world's true hidden king. Not to mention, it still doesn't conflict with the classic reversal of Imu, which is Umi the sea, an idea that's always been used to argue that Imu's the sea devil or the earth god, depending on how you want to interpret the flip. There's also the Imu looking in katakana like the kanji for hotoke, which is the kanji for the Buddha. There was always that thing, and it could still work. So Imu's name may just be this incredibly deliberate choice that perfectly overlaps in so many different perfect ways that Oda couldn't help but use all of them somehow. That might actually be my favorite part of this theory in general, because it's kind of like got some real precedent in the story. Unlike the silhouette stuff, we know that Oda is crazy deliberate when he chooses names, and this one just feels extra on the nose, especially after you see what the rest of the theory has going for it. For example, we just talked about how Imu's name is spelled, but how about how it's actually set? Because that's actually giving some major parrot vibes as well. So let's seriously take a second here and look at the way that Imu actually speaks. I've talked about a little bit before how it's kind of weird the way he talks, and used it as some evidence for why Imu and Mu may actually be separate entities or beings. But this theory, of course, tackles it from a very different angle, and I'll admit, it's kind of rad. Now, I want to point out that this is one of these pieces of evidence that don't really translate particularly well into English, but the foundations are still absolutely there because of how it was translated anyways. But regardless, I guess someone living in Japan and consuming the Japanese theories too and just speaking Japanese, Imu's weird way of referring to themselves in the third person has become one of the more interesting talking points amongst Japanese readers. What I'm referring to is that throughout Imu's many appearances at this point, they frequently refer to themselves simply as Mu or Imu, rather than using a more conventional first name pronoun. Now, this is not unheard of. Japanese people sometimes do that. Like, I could say, Manu wa tsukareteru, and I could say Manu is a little bit tired, and just refer to myself, and I would kind of contrast that with like something else, right? But it's like rare, it kind of is only used in like certain anime tropes and not that often in casual speech. So why would Imu then be doing that? Is this an ancient relic of how they used to talk during the Void Century? Or maybe even before that? I kind of think that could be the case, but there's also the idea that this is just how birds talk, even in One Piece. Now, I sadly can't play the audio because, you know, Japanese companies scare you with copyright stuff, but the South birds have the exact same voice effects as Imu does during the Cobra interaction. But let's actually instead fixate on the words themselves here. You've already heard the classic line, "Polly want a cracker," right? Well, that comes from the idea that a bird is able to hear an audio cue associated with an action and then repeat it as a means of indicating that they want that action. Obviously, parrots ain't human, brother, sadly, so they don't really understand like first-person language that the way that a human would do, right? Everything that they say is based on just imitating sounds and expecting a reaction from that. If someone repeatedly says a bird's name, the bird often learns to repeat that name back. And suddenly, when you consider that we're talking about Imu being a parrot, well, then the fact that he calls himself Mu or Imu rather than me or I does start making sense. He'd just be repeating his name from someone who's already said it to him a bunch of times. Though again, keep in mind that referring to yourself in third person is way more common in Japanese than it would be in English anyways, so I still like the point, but it's maybe not quite as strong. But there is also another point of evidence tied to this repeating pattern that I've also seen brought up here, and I kind of wanted to toss it in here because I definitely can see like the vision at least, and spiritually it feels good. Imu has the Devil's Fruit, a power that seems to be the culmination of many Devil Fruit powers. It may even have been the first progenitor Devil Fruit, period. And interestingly enough, it is not the Akuma no Mi, it is just power Devil Fruit. The power is Akuma no Mi. It's the only fruit, assuming it is a fruit and not just the power of Devil Fruits, whose name does not repeat. Again, like, I personally am still a little bit torn what that means, because it might just mean that he just has the ability of Devil Fruits, not an actual Devil Fruit. But it's still interesting that every other Devil Fruit name is based on repetition. The Gomu Gomu no Mi, the Mera Mera no Mi, the Yami Yami no Mi, you know, the Ope Ope no Mi. Pick your favorite. What's your favorite Devil Fruit? Put it in the comments. The core word is almost always spoken twice. So it does beg the question, why do they repeat? Is it an Oda style choice? Probably, but could it be because one man, or better yet, one parrot, named all the fruits and was repeating the name when he originally made them? Now, obviously, whether or not Oda intended any connection is impossible to say here, but it's just another small piece that's fun, right, of like the nest I'm trying to build up here for the Parrot Imu theory. But now, allow me to bring you not just one, but two Manu original additions to this entire theory, something that I think fits the entire repetition idea that, at the very least, I haven't seen floating around, but honestly, like, little side rant here at this point, making One Piece theories is very difficult because it used to be back in the day, like 4, 5, 6 years ago when I started making some, or seeing how people talked here in Japan and made theories. It was barely like a common thing. There were like some people who had fun doing it on forums, and maybe like a YouTuber here or there who did like some theories. Shout out to Joy Boy Theories, I guess, who's been like one of the OGs. But it has just become such a massive thing overall, where no matter what you say, the chances that someone somewhere in like probably someone has had that idea in some way, shape, or form before. So it's a little bit difficult at this point, you know, just like I personally don't think there are a lot of just purely original theories anymore, with exceptions, right? But just something I wanted to point out, because at this point we just have probably like 1 million people or more, I don't know, just like theorizing online on TikTok and X and on Reddit and on YouTube, and it's really hard to keep a track of everything. Just a little side rant. Anyways, my point being, maybe someone else has said what I'm about to say, but I didn't see anything anywhere. So if you did, good on you for also being clever as hell, I guess. Imu calls characters the wrong name a bunch, almost as if he's trying to place who they are and is using the only term he's aware of for them: Nidhogg, Nika, Joy Boy, Davy Jones, these are all names that Imu has used for not those characters, but people he just associates with them. He calls Luffy Nika and Joy Boy. He calls Zebek Davy Jones. He calls Loki Nidhogg, and it really feels deliberate but paint. Now, I've talked about this before, of course, at some point, but obviously he knows or should know that these are not literally these figures, and eventually he then actually starts calling them by their right names as well. But maybe, in his mind, the easiest thing to call them is something that he's already said a bunch before, right? Like, until he really knows who Luffy is, it's just easier to call him Nika or Joy Boy because he kinda looks and behaves so similarly to them. The same goes for Loki with Nidhogg, and likely was the same between Zebek and his own predecessor, Davy Jones. Parrot Moo might just be picking those names because it's just what he knows, right? And another thing here, since we've established that parrots repeat, don't you kind of find it interesting that Imu seems, well, like obsessed with repeating history overall? Like his entire plan at this point seems to hinge on doing the exact same actions that he or maybe someone else has already done during the Void Century before. He's already preached to Loki about how the mistake that he made was repeating the errors of the giants, so it's very likely that Imu is causing another big flood similar to the one from the Void Century, or at least it's really likely that that's at least like somehow part of his plan to recreate the events that led to the Void Century, but maybe change one key aspect this time. History is gonna repeat itself, and we're swiftly approaching a climax to the entire series that is bound to repeat the same imagery we saw on the mural from chapter 1138. And if Imu is actually a parrot, well, maybe the whole point of why he's taking the same actions now is because that's what he does at his core. He repeats, he doesn't adapt. And I just kind of feel like so many core parts of the series are centered in repetition anyways. Once before the time skip, once after. Gomu, Gomu, right? You get it. And man, does it just not make a lot of sense if that's the case, right? Because the big bad guy is a big old parrot, Joy Boy's parrot, unless he wasn't always Joy Boys. Most versions of the bird theory assume that if Imu really were a pet bird, he'd belong to Joy Boy, right? Pirates and parrots, pretty classic pirate trope, finally paid off this time in One Piece. But there is a key point of evidence from chapter 1188 actually that adds an extra layer to this specific theory. It kind of makes one beg the question, what if they were actually Lili's bird? Right? Like the point in question is the very first page of 1188 where we see Imu tell Joy Boy their name. Joy Boy, over some sort of transponder snail or radio, asks if anyone is there, and Imu responds. And then Joy Boy asks Imu their name, and they hesitantly go, Moo? I am Imu, which admittedly definitely can read like a bird responding to that question. Maybe Joy Boy was coming for Lili, that dog, right? But since he's meeting Joy Boy, we are seeing that Imu had a name already before ever meeting Joy Boy, so who gave him the name? Who gave him the name, right? Well, how about the woman that Imu is absolutely obsessed with? Nefertari D, Lili, right? Here we are, 800 years later, and Lili is still the one name that seems capable of shaking Imu to his core. Imu personally keeps Lili in a massive painting on his wall, longingly staring at it. He demands that the Gorosei find her descendant Vivi. When Cobra reveals Lili's full name and the contents of her letter, Imu immediately interrupts him to talk about her. So the idea here would be that Nefertari Lili gave Imu to Joy Boy, or Imu decided to join Joy Boy the same way, say, Chopper left Kureha, or Odin left Whitebeard to join Roger. And that memory at the beginning of 1188 is Imu recalling that first interaction he ever had with Joy Boy ever. There's also a flower connection between Lili and Imu that might come into play here. I'm actually, right now as we're speaking, working on a big flower theory video I've kind of been interested in creating for a while now. Be excited for that one coming up. So this one feels extra special to me, but I will admit it may just be coincidence, but I'll share it with you anyways. There is a flower known as Alstroemeria psittacina that is referred to as the parrot lily, the parrot's lily, or Princess Lily. Seeing as Imu is directly connected to flowers and to Lili, there's definitely a world where him being a parrot pays off in this like super crazy giga 8D chess Oda circle way. But I'm just not convinced 100%. Anyways, just a little peek. There is a big flower theory video coming. I think it's very cool, and there is a lot there. However, a very key Disney connection that might also have happened in chapter 1188 that might have sold me on things way more is this here. I just can't wait to be king. Oh, sorry. Wrong Disney movie. I actually want to talk about Aladdin right now because that's the movie that this theory focuses on. Which honestly should come as no surprise because we just saw Luffy bust out Gear 5 Genie during chapter 1188, which definitely feels like a nod to Robin Williams' Genie in the Disney movie Aladdin, right? And you know who is in Aladdin? An evil parrot named Iago, which is something I think some people have actually pointed out somewhere would maybe mean that Imu belonged to a villain, but I doubt the connection is meant to be like one-to-one here. What is actually suggested though is that this piece of evidence actually connects to one of Imu's abilities in a super unique and thematic way, which is the Domi Reversi. You see, Domi Reversi overall is based on a game, Reversi. The game is built around flipping an opponent's pieces to your own color by surrounding them with your own pieces. That's very much extremely close to what Imu's power appears to just do. Targets are overtaken, physically transformed, and placed under Imu's control on their side. We actually even see the board game used metaphorically during Imu using that power originally, and that kind of makes the name feel very deliberate. Domi suggests domination, while Reversi describes the act of reversing or flipping someone's allegiance to your own team. So Imu is essentially treating people like pieces on a game board, converting the other side until the board fully belongs to his side. So how does any of that tie into the parrot from Aladdin? Well, Reversi is the original name for the board game commonly sold today as Othello. There's a small nuance difference where Othello starts with the board in a very specific order and is a little bit more structured version of the original Reversi, but at their core, they are the same game. And it's through Othello that we actually find the Aladdin connection between Imu's powers and the parrot, because the game Othello is named after a famous Shakespeare play, of course, as we all know, we're cultured people on this channel, Othello, the Moor of Venice. Now, in Shakespeare's Othello, the person secretly manipulating the entire tragedy is Iago. He works from the shadows, feeds people carefully chosen lies, and turns allies against one another without openly ever presenting himself as the real big enemy. As with everything Shakespeare, there's a lot of betrayal at the center of things, and what drives Iago, though, is his sense of betrayal towards his leader, Othello. Now, this Iago sounds familiar, right? Now, it does sound a lot like Imu, a character who thinks that everyone betrayed him and rules the world from the shadows, manipulating everything without putting himself in the spotlight. But as I pointed out, Iago also is the name of the famous talking parrot from Disney's Aladdin, so you kind of see the connection now, right? Imu uses Domi Reversi. Reversi is also known as Othello. Othello, the play, has a hidden manipulator character called Iago, and the name of the bird from Aladdin is Iago. The most famous modern Iago is a parrot from Aladdin. Luffy just fought Imu as a genie, like the one from Aladdin. So this is definitely one of the theory's more playful connections that I like, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't very fun and pretty rad to just like talk about. I always love these sorts of connections, and it kind of matches up very well with like the wordplay stuff I was on about earlier. Speaking of which, there was one thing I've actually been wanting to circle back to now that we've established a bunch of stuff here. The connection between the celestial dragons and birds. Now, to be clear, this one is also a Manu original edition. Well, not original, but recontextualized, I guess, because I've talked about this a bunch on the channel before, and it seems really relevant if we're gonna say that Imu's a parrot. If Imu really is meant to be bird-themed, then it wouldn't be the first time that Oda has used birds to connect celestial dragon stuff. In fact, two of the series' most mysterious characters are already associated with them, Mihawk and Doflamingo. Let's start with Mihawk here. Everything about Mihawk screams bird of prey. His nickname is literally Hawk Eyes. He has one of the most recognizable eye designs in the entire series, the Imu eyes with a slight color shift. Not to mention his surname, Dracul, means son of the dragon, potentially meaning that he is a celestial dragon, but also it can translate as son of the devil, as in maybe this devil Mr. Mu here. And it is, at the very least, a very weird coincidence, if it's not more than that. And that's to say, if you're trying to build a theory around Imu secretly being a bird, it's definitely worth pointing out at least that the only other character with those eyes is literally named after one and also tied to Imu. Now, on the flip side to that, as I alluded to earlier, you've also got Doflamingo. This one is a little bit more obvious because Oda isn't super exactly subtle about it. Dofi is named after a bird, and his signature move is the birdcage. Hey, one of the most memorable abilities in the entire series that kind of broke, you know, like the power system a little bit. Didn't make that much sense, but it was still pretty cool. Need I remind you, we just talked about bird cages a little while ago with the Imu iconography in the flower room too, which now kind of really stands out because Dofi also seems to know that Imu exists and that he knows about the national treasure of Marijoa. Now, Dofi is also the character that Oda uses to literally introduce Imu to us. Remember that? Like, he's speaking, monologuing, while Imu walks for the very first time. I just kind of wanted to toss that out there because, well, it kind of feels apt to say the least, but it also brings this all the way back to the beginning. Is Imu a parrot? What's the final judgment here? Well, maybe. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't be mad if this were to be true, that's for sure. I think it would bring a much needed aspect of comedy to Imu's story, considering he feels like 10 times more serious than like any other major villain of One Piece up until this point. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's just different. And if you're enjoying theorizing, have you ever considered the fact that Oda revealed to us everything that will happen just in the first chapter, in chapter 1? That's right, I have a whole video detailing how Shanks' plan to go north has been laid out from the very beginning, and you can check that idea out right here. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. I hope you're satisfied that we talked about this theory. Let me know your thoughts about Parrot Piece. Again, flower theory in the works. I have some other stuff cooking up, so stay around for that, and I will see you in the next video. Put a parrot in the comments if you made it to the end.